Welcome back, everybody, to SEV Live. My name is Kai Hoffmann. I'm the CEO of the Soar Financial Group. And today we have a great and special guest, David B. Collum, or Dave Collum, as he likes to go by. And he's a professor at Cornell University, but he's well-versed in a lot of topics, and he's a fan of gold. So we're going to talk macro, what is happening in the U.S. in particular, the Fed fund rates, how they're trapped, but also like endgame scenarios. I'm really curious about what is the next step in the or for the Fed or in general. Like, how is this whole scenario playing out? And Dave has a great opinion. We're going to have a great discussion about it. Just had a chance to sort of pre-chat with him a bit. We should have recorded that because it was a fun discussion. But I'll have him on the screen here in just a few seconds. But before I do that, and before I welcome him, join us and follow us on YouTube and Twitter. Hit that like and subscribe button, and to turn that bell notification on as well. That way you get a push message whenever we upload new content. Leave a comment. What do you think is going to happen? And how is everything going to play out? What is your opinion on that? And with that being said, let me introduce Mr. Dave B. Collum. Dave, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. This is a fresh new look at the world for me for
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, we're going to talk a bit of commodities as well. So really looking forward to the discussion. But I'm going to start our conversation with a bombshell of a question, I think. The question is like, Dave, when Armageddon? When is shit literally going to hit the fan?
Last night at 7 o'clock in the U.S. I, when they raided Trump's house, that could actually be a trigger, I think. But Armageddon is defined as somewhat as after the fact, right? So when when the Nikkei tanked, they thought Armageddon had started, and 20 years later, Armageddon was still happening. So I think it's an infinite loop, and you won't know until after the books are written when it started and things like that. So,
Yeah.
and it won't feel like Armageddon. It'll feel like you're just rotting. I think it'll just feel like a Chinese water torture.
Yeah, a Chinese water charger. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. No,
Yeah.
it's an interesting environment, right? Like I've been saying, where it feels like for 10 years, something is going to happen, something's going to break in the system, and nothing is breaking. Yes, we're seeing a lot of inflation right now, or very high inflation, 9.1% as per last report, but the system is not breaking. What's holding it together, Dave?
Well, I would argue that it feels like it has begun to break. Reminded me, I was a gold bug in '99, and so I was buying gold from 290 down to 270. And meanwhile, the Nasdaq was still roaring, and so I was feeling insane. And there was about five of us who cared about gold. Uh, and recently, someone said, "Oh, that was easy back then. Gold was so cheap." And I said, "No, it's not easy when there's five gold bugs in the entire world. That's a hard time to be buying gold." Um, and then since then, it's done well for me because my cost basis is essentially the bottom. Um, and I have quite a bit, and I'm very strong fisted with it. I'm not selling it anytime soon. Um, what's going to happen? Well, I think we've started a real bear market. I think the inflation has gotten into the DNA. I remember I wrote about the housing market and the subprime crisis. You're not going to believe this, but I can prove it if you need me to. In March, May 6th of 2002, I wrote an email to a friend at Goldman and said the banking system's going to collapse. And I laid out the subprime crisis. I laid out General Electric going down. I laid out banks going down, and it took 5 years to get there. And so I can be stupidly early. It was still probably my best call. Um, I caught the commodity rise from '01 to 13 pretty well, but it was because I thought inflation was going to roar, and it. You can argue whether inflation roared or not, right? You can argue all day about that. I would say it was ripping along pretty good, but I at some level got it wrong because no one else acknowledged that the the inflation was here. But I did catch that cycle, and then I got a little hurt on the downside too. Um, I went back into commodities and resources in December of 2020, and I was first triggered by Exxon getting kicked out of the Dow, and I said, "Oh boy, that's a buy signal right there." And then the second important thing was when Jesse Felder pointed out that the S&P was 2% energy and it used to be 16. I said, "Oh, that's another buy signal." So I think the commodity cycle has started. I've seen estimates that say it's going to go on for 25 years, and you can make a case for it because we haven't prepared for it. We haven't been drilling, we haven't been mining, we haven't been doing any of that stuff. So it's got to go on for a long time. I think there's two black swans lurking out there, in my opinion. They're not black swans to me if I'm right, because that means I saw them coming. But the two that I think would shock investors to no end, one would be that Powell grew a spine and didn't flinch. And so if he keeps banging on the rates until the system really breaks, and people think broken is a 20% downturn in the equity markets. No, when something's breaking, there's teeth flying, there's shattering glass, there's bombs exploding, right? It'll be an 07, 08 repeat, I think, right? You could see even the mortgage market top and start to collapse in 06. So you get a lot of warning on these things. So I think we've begun. That's my opinion. There'll be a lot of false starts, a lot of bear market rallies, a lot of declarations that 20% down means we're done. My market valuation metrics, I have 25 of them. They all say we're right now, after whatever correction we've done, we're still over 100% over fair value. And it's 25. It's not one. It's not a PE. It's a lot of metrics. They all say it. So if we correct 50% from here, you'll see the teeth flying and the glass shattering, right? I mean, that will break everything.
Absolutely. Like you mentioned mortgage rates as well, and mortgage interest rates have just been exploding in recent weeks and months as well. Like, what does that mean? Because it seems like a lot of homeowners have variable rates as well, and all of a sudden their interest rate or mortgage rate goes from, let's say, 5% to 6, 7, 8%. And that makes a big difference. When do you see that sort of bubble bursting there as well? And maybe as an anecdote as well, I've been following quite a few YouTubers, and they've been all but talking about real estate. I own like 10 houses, and they're all cross-financed, like a massive bubble. It felt like was building there. Feels like it's about to burst. And auto loans is another one I'm thinking of, by the way.
You keep hearing, you'll hear about how we're in a bigger bubble than in 07 in real estate, but you can't see it. One of the reasons I think is because this bubble has gotten into private equity, whereas in the 07 bubble, it was all retail. And so I think this bubble will break and the damage will be done with guys who took super cheap permanent capital and bought residential real estate, packaged it up into tranches and sold that. So there will be pain there, but I don't think it'll be as systemic to the homeowners themselves this time. I think it's already started. You're starting to pick up rumblings of, slow activity in the housing market and stuff like that. So I think everything has started at some level. It's like when winter's coming, right? I say, shit, it's a little cold out there. It's getting kind of brisk, and you don't get the warning. I waited for a hurricane once in Florida, and I ended up right in the eye of it. And I'd look out over the ocean and say, "Oh, is that it? Is that it?" And I was watching, and the wind's kind of picking up. Is that it? And eventually it came, but it seemed like a long way.
Yeah.
So
us Germans are scared
what things
of the winter
we'll do
right now,
in the crisis? What things we'll do in the crisis is a separate issue, right? So you don't know if gold's going to go up or down. You don't know. Equities will go down if we have a crisis, right? Because people will start, there will be a liquidity crisis again. There has to be, I think, which I just whammied the whole model by saying there has to be. And so I'm fairly optimistic that the apocalypse has arrived.
Optimistic apocalypse has arrived. That sounds like an oxymoron.
Well, I have a lot of cash, though. I have a lot of cash, so I'm waiting to be prying gold fillings out of dead soldiers on the battlefield, right?
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting anecdote. Like, cash, is that the right instrument right now? Is that?
Well, I don't know, because if they can stretch it out, then they'll kill me with the cash, right? Yeah. That's why I'm rooting for apocalypse tomorrow, right? I mean, I would love to have the markets just do what they got to do and get over with, because my wealth is eroding as it sits in cash. I have probably 35% gold, and my energy position, I'm old enough now where the position looks really big, but it's not a big percentage. So I never quite know how to think about that because it looks like a horribly big exposure, but I go, but it's still not a big percentage. Um, if you put a gun to my head to put all your cash into something, I distribute it across energy, resources, and gold. Um,
Oh, energy is an interesting one because I want to talk a bit about the Inflation Reduction Act, which has a really interesting name, by the way,
Oh, the
for an act,
stupidest
right?
goddamn thing on the planet. It has nothing to do with inflation. Absolutely nothing to
No, it
do
was
with
like
inflation.
$300 billion are designated to pay down federal debt. So I found that quite interesting when I read about that. I was like, how does that have to do with anything? Like, but you mentioned energy. What is energy for you? Like, maybe define that as well. Like, how much of that is renewable? Like, is it just let's call them the traditional fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal to a degree?
My only exposure to renewable is basic resources. So I figure that if I own Rio Tinto, that to the extent that they mine stuff that's needed, I'll be okay. So I don't. I think the alternative energy investing world is a scam. I think it's very scammy, put it that way. And it might eventually not be a scam, but I think it's going to be a scam for quite a while. But they'll spend a lot of money mining important metals out of the ground. So I would rather own the big industrial miners, which, by the way, are dirt cheap. I worry, I've asked a lot of smart guys, how do you know when something's dirt cheap or when you're being duped? And I've got some unbelievably cheap looking opportunity, unbelievably cheap. Look at Rio Tinto. Just there's a good example. Look at Rio Tinto. It's got a dividend, if I'm remembering correctly, because I have so many of these in my head, it's got a dividend yield of something like 11% and a PE of 5 and no debt. And I thought, okay, there must be geographic risk in this. And then you look and it would take an asteroid to take out all their mines. They've got some Australian risk, I guess, and that place is going to hell in a handbasket.
That's
But
like
that's only
Canada, though.
social, right? Yeah, it's like Canada. It's not gonna. They're not gonna wrap up the mines. They're just gonna take away all their civil liberties, right? Um, and so I'm really comfortable owning Rio Tinto. I haven't yet bought BHP, but I probably will just to diversify. Um, there's some dirt cheap gold miners out there, and I hated gold miners for years. So I caught some of the rise from the '01 bottom up. Not a big exposure because I never trusted the gold miners. And the liar at the opening, tungsten bar in their front pocket, that sort of thing. And and then one day I was listening to Fred Hickey. He starts talking about cheap there, and I go, I don't want to hear about optionality, and I don't want to hear about how much gold they have in the ground. I live in a lake. I'm not a fishery, that sort of thing. And then he starts quoting the numbers. He starts talking about their cash flow and their earnings and their dividends. And I'm going, wait a minute, that sounds like a tobacco stock. I dug into it and I decided that the gold mining industry, which seemed to be filled with people who didn't know how to make money for years, and the fact they gave it all back, the whole bull market got given back. I go, you guys blew it, right? Gold went from 256 up to 19, settled back around 12, and you're still not making money. What kind of clowns are you, right? Apparently they tightened up. Apparently they figured out, oh, don't do that again, right? And so I've got some individual gold miners in a Fidelity Gold Fund, and there's one I thought was a great idea, and it's gotten greater by price metrics. Larry Lepard I happened to have picked up a comment from him that suggested that some like GMC, I think it's called GMC Mining. I just looked at it yesterday. Again, it looks like they're giving it away. I mean, it's unbelievable. But I can't tell if I'm the sucker at the table. And I've asked pros, when you're looking at something that everything looks dirt cheap, what do you look for to find out if you're getting duped? What's the tell? I bought tobacco stocks when they were dirt. And the one problem was the risk of the lawsuit, $142 billion lawsuit. And I'm sitting there and I'm laboring. This is a story I've told a million times. I'm laboring over the decision. And one day I read an article that says if they lose the lawsuit, they're going to have to raise cigarettes 50 cents a pack to pay it off over 20 years. I go, oh my God, the lawsuit isn't even risk. So I bought a bunch and put some kids through college with it, right? I mean, it was really an amazing, because the last puzzle piece fit perfectly. I don't trust the super cheap equities because in a world where the yield is being reached for from every direction. When something's sitting right in front of you, you go, Mickey, it's a trap. The cheese is not free. Don't go for it. And that's what I worry about. But I am buying some stuff now.
No, I agree. No, I'm fully there with you. It's just the overall sentiment, I guess. Like the flow of funds is just not there yet. It flew like the money.
But why aren't yield desperate value managers not spotting these? I don't know why. The guys who say they're value are buying Amazon, right? Why are they not seeing value? I don't have a good answer to that question.
It's an interesting, like back in 2021, before the summer, or like during the summer, we had expanding margins. Right now, with higher inflation, the margins are decreasing, and there's only a handful of companies that are actually investable for the bigger funds, or for the bigger names, for the bigger generalists. For retail, yeah, we can play all we want at GCM Mining, for example, but we can't, or the big funds, they can only buy a Barrick and Newmont, and then it gets very thin already. You got an Agnico Eagle, those are the top three, and then volumes are too small, market caps are tiny right now, so you can't even deploy that capital. I think that's one of the problems, and not everybody has a dividend policy, right? Barrick doesn't have a dividend policy. They do buybacks, but it's nothing you can plan against.
Buybacks. Right? I hate buybacks. I detest buybacks.
So the investors that want dividends, they're bypassing Barrick, despite them trying to issue money or give back money to the investors. But the algos can't plan with special dividends, like they can't do that, or special share buybacks. I think that's one of the problems, that the majors are still sending the wrong signals.
Well, I got onto an equity called Jaguar Mining, and I followed the lead, and there's this miner in Brazil, and you go, okay, I don't know what's going on in Brazil really, but there's obviously risk there. Of course, it's not Canada. It's not Alaska. And then, but again, PE of 5, big dividend, no debt. I'm just baffled by this. And then it got cheaper. And I'm not buying more right now because I'm thinking, this could be Bernie Madoff micro cap. And I just don't know what I'm not catching.
It's just a very complex topic, right? Like a lot of geology, it's too technical for many as well. Like what do the assets yield? Like, do they find more ounces? It's a depleting reserve base usually as well, unless they spend tons of money on research, meaning exploration, or they buy assets, right?
But some of them are so cheap that it would take 3 years of production to pay off your investment. I mean, they're just
no, the market is irrational. The market is really irrational.
But it makes no sense. It makes no sense when there are vast swaths of people who say nothing's cheap. What do I buy? How are these sitting there? It's like the economist who says, the market's efficient. If there was a $100 bill on the ground, it can't be real because it wouldn't be there. I'm seeing $100 bills on the ground in places that I'm uncomfortable with.
Uncomfortable, I think, is the right word. Is mining as well. A lot of people are uncomfortable with mining investments.
Very much so.
Right. So I think that's a factor as well. And it's just the lack of dividend.
We talked in advance about the platinum miners.
Yeah.
I did a deep dive on platinum miners. Platinum hasn't moved in 20 years. It's the only thing in the world that hasn't moved in 20 years. I mean, it's the best negative inflation hedge I've ever seen. You might as well just bury your cash in the backyard. And I know that it's about vehicles, combustion, and all that stuff. But the fact of the matter is the equities all have a cash flow. The 3 biggest ones are all South African. You go, okay, maybe those guys are going to go nuts on me, right? But they're stupid cheap, stupid high-paying dividends. The South Africans just have to hold their shit together for a couple of years for me to be okay.
It's platinum. The sentiment of platinum is like, that's a conversation I haven't had too many times, right? It's just completely dead. Like the market completely ignores it. And I think you mentioned the factors, like South Africa is one. They have to go deeper and deeper to mine. There are not a lot of new deposits because CapEx is insane for those bigger projects or to build those. yeah, there's a margin squeeze happening within the industry, I think, because production costs are higher. And then you mentioned geopolitical risk as well, South Africa. So you
But
have
their
to,
profit margins are massive right now. They're a
they
royalty
should be,
trust, essentially, right? They're a
they should be.
royalty
Yeah.
trust. And I asked a friend from the Royal Bank of Canada, can you get me some info on these platinum miners, right? And the guy's a metals junkie. And so I figured he can, and he sends me some stuff, and it's 2017. It reminds me of Peter Lynch's book where he talks about going to La Quinta. He walks up to the CEO and approaches the CEO of La Quinta Hotels. And the guy says, "You're the first analyst to come and talk to me." Right? It's one of those. They've just been forgotten. And so
You might be actually right with that. Yeah.
I was out there giving podcasts and talking about Jaguar Mining, and you could see it moving. And I think I was moving it. I mean, I think it's that ridiculous. It's that thinly traded.
Yeah, no, all
Maybe
the miners
it's too
are
small. Maybe it's so small that the guys who actually deploy money don't bother. Maybe it's
$250 million market cap. Like that doesn't even pop up on any radar in New York, really. Right?
Big enough for me.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's what I mean. It's great for retail, and I think some of the retail investors are playing. Although it's been summer, volumes have been dead, and like there's been complete lack of interest over the summer. We'll see what it does. You know, in the fall, gold seems to be holding steady and going up actually, and that of course changes positive like sentiment as well. But something needs to break first, I think. I always said, like before, the 401k money needs to be scared. Right? But I don't think they're scared enough.
If anyone's listening to this story and can tell me why Rio or a couple of these dirt cheap junior miners or the platinum miners are a bad idea, please send me an email. I mean, dbc6 at cornell.edu, you can find it. If you can't find my email, given my personal information, I don't want to talk to you. You're not smart enough to talk to, right? So, but if you know why I'm about to get duped on these, let me know. But I don't have big positions because I haven't yet put the last puzzle piece together.
We should do a feedback round once you get those emails in. Well, we should talk about that and see what the arguments are, right?
I've put it out on Twitter and said, someone tell me, and no one does. It's always about the engines. It's always about the engines.
Yeah. Everybody's like, but even like, let's talk copper, for example. BHP just put out a massive offer for Oz Minerals in Australia. I think it was an $8.4 billion offer to buy a copper miner. Right, so there are those bigger miners, and they're now looking to sort of diversify a little bit towards energy metals. They're called now. They're not base material or base commodities anymore. They're energy metals. Right.
Yeah, I know.
So, but even that is unloved by the market. So it's puzzling, right? But to sort of come back to the beginning of our conversation, like talking about. Go ahead.
The apocalypse.
Exactly.
You asked me the two black swans. I never got to them.
Yeah.
The one black swan is that Powell grew a spine and will hurt us badly. And then I got distracted. The second black swan to me, which I think is more destructive, is if Powell pivots and it doesn't work. And then all of a sudden the entire model that the Fed will save us goes down the toilet. And so I think a failed pivot is way more dangerous than a failure to pivot.
Interesting. Yeah, because a failed pivot would mean like they lower interest rates or stop raising altogether. But how likely do you see that to be with a jobs report that came out last week?
I think the jobs report is fictional.
That's
it doesn't make sense.
It's sort of like all of a sudden it was over 500,000 new jobs.
Yeah. I think they're just making it up. They're making it up. One time, Zero Hedge did this great thing where there were two kinds of jobs, both of which supposedly were measured. One was temporary, one was full jobs or something like that. And they gave these two big, multi-$100,000 numbers for the two. And Zero Hedge posted this little article that showed that if you divide one by the other, it came out to precisely 1.50000. And you go, they're just making it up. That's it.
I don't know. It didn't make any sense because all of a sudden, like we were under the jobs report. It was weaker. The next week, we had twice as many new jobs created. Like, it seems, fictional. Like, as a pragmatic, it just doesn't make any sense. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for something.
Yeah, they lied.
It's just like I read a comment on Twitter. I think it was by a friend of mine, and he said, "Well, there's so many like how do you call them bean counters, right? That follow the rules and guidelines. Like the question is like, where do they go get it wrong then? Where does that come from that all of a sudden the numbers are so wrong, especially the expectations? How can they miss so badly all of a sudden?
Oh, because the street level bean counters hand over their data to higher sources. And then, there's famous stories of LBJ throwing the numbers back and some guy saying, make these better, right? If their lips are moving, they're lying, is my general rule of thumb.
So don't you think there would be any whistleblowers in the background? Like somebody at the Department of Statistics or so saying, hey, this doesn't make any sense? Or do they?
So they do it. What happens next? They get fired.
Probably.
So for a brief microsecond, some guys spoke up and then they're gone. Darwinian selection. For a brief moment, some animal was born with the wrong number of legs. Boom, they're gone. They get scrubbed from the gene pool. So the gene pool is filled with survivors, right? And the survivors include doctors who supported the vaccine because they'd get fired, and people who took the vaccine because they get fired, right? I mean, it's just the way it works.
Now, we transgressed a bit talking about stocks, and I really enjoyed the discussion. But I just want to talk, like maybe wrap up our conversation for a second. Let's say Black Swan number 2 happens, and people lose trust. The Fed gets dissolved, or something happens there. Like, what
I
are
don't
the
think
next
the Fed
steps?
would necessarily dissolve. It would just be a faith loss. All of a sudden, there would be panicking. Getting rid of the Fed is a different altogether story. Yeah. I don't. If you want to talk about major regime changes, right? Bretton Woods 5.8 or whatever you want to do it, those are going to take a lot longer. Those happen after the blood is in the streets in a very big way. They're not also going to fix something by doing a regime change. They're going to be picking up the pieces.
Do you think World War III will be a trigger for that? Like, do you see that happening? Is that a possibility? It's like, I'm just looking for triggers, right? So I pray to God World War III doesn't happen, because that'll be bad for everybody. But it needs a trigger.
Well, if you're listening to geopolitics, the odds that you're being lied to are through the roof. So I've paid very close attention to the extent I can the Ukraine story. And nothing coming out of what we'll call the mainstream press. And the mainstream press is very broadly based now. The only source that you can get anything is bloggers and people who care. So vast majority of the information about Ukraine is just a big lie. And it's a big lie in all sorts of different ways. And they've completely shut down flow of information from Russia, so we don't get their side. We're told that Zelensky's a hero. He's a corrupt bastard. He is a seriously corrupt bastard. The Ukrainian freedom fighters are a bunch of Nazis, literally. You can easily make a case that NATO caused the war. Not just didn't help, not just didn't stop. They caused the war. I will be making that case. Putin repeatedly approached NATO and said, you got to stop doing this or we're going to end up in a world of trouble. And NATO not only said, we can't do that, which would be maybe rational. They said, we don't care. We don't care what you think. We flipped them off. When you tell Russia you don't care what their sovereign needs are, you're a problem.
They want to be taken serious as well as a sovereign nation.
Well, sovereign nations have to respect sovereign nations, period. It doesn't matter which one, and if not, then you better be ready. If you want to blow off a sovereign nation, you better be ready to take them out easily. And Russia's not going away. And so I think NATO is. I don't doubt it's like a fight where someone threw the first punch. Doesn't mean that person started the fight, right? And my goal in a fight is to make sure that I throw the first punch. I knew that as a kid, right? Yeah. Right. So I better assess at the point where, okay, this is now unavoidable. Now the goal is to get the person to realize that I know it's unavoidable and then clobber the bastard. Right. So I think Putin threw the first punch, but I think NATO caused the fight. No. Period. I think it's that simple.
Well, there's been a lot of agitation, obviously, like about moving the border and stuff further east.
Well, not just that, but the Azov battalion amassed 100,000 troops. These literally are Nazis, right? These are not just Nazis metaphorically. These are Nazis who celebrate, Stepan Bandera's birthday, who is a famous, Ukrainian fighting Nazi affiliated with Hitler, right? These are real Nazis, and they were in the Azovstal, and they'd formed a stronghold in Mariupol, where we Putin bombed the shit out of them. You go, well, let me see if I got this right. Putin surrounded 100,000 Nazis and then wiped them out. How is that irrational? It's rough. It's bare knuckle. But if you're Ukrainian and 20 million of your countrymen lost their lives to the Nazis, and now they're getting active again on your southern border, what are you going to do? The United States would rub them out completely, and it wouldn't take 20 seconds. So Putin had to do it. I think Putin had to move on the neo-Nazis, and they're not even neo; they're just Nazis in Mariupol. And then I can find people say there are no Nazis in Mariupol. But I can tell you, there's real smart guys. And what you do is you read articles from 2018 or 19, and they're horror stories about how bad the leaders are, how corrupt the country is, how bad the Nazis are. The minute the war started, all of a sudden, everyone's a good guy in Ukraine.
Interesting. Yeah,
it's just a lie. It's just a lie.
The story changed quickly, right? It went to black and white easily. Like it went back to Cold War pre-1990.
Yeah. And the Ukrainians, by the way, are the victims. There's no question that's true. But when Zelensky says, we'll fight to the last Ukrainian, I think there's some moms going, I'm not so sure I agree with you on that one. A suicide mission for my son doesn't sit well with me. And you can say that all you want, but this is a proxy war. So the moms ought to be saying, no, not my son. Right? And they're tough. But so again, back to the fact that nothing is truthful anymore. And raiding Trump's house last night, I think will cause way more problems than some people think. Trump haters think, oh yeah, we finally got him. They don't realize in the red states, there's a bunch of guys locking and loading right now. They're so mad. They have no idea how problematic raiding Mar-a-Lago was last night. Or they do, and my model of why they did it is wrong. If they did it just to give Trump holy hell, they might have bit off more than they can chew. Because it's going to be a rallying cry. There.
Like a
Rubicon. It was a Rubicon.
Just for a former
president. And I did a Twitter
like...
poll last night. 90% of the poll said they crossed the Rubicon on that one. Did they know it? So they either didn't realize, which means they're stupid beyond Kamala Harris level stupid. Okay. Or I'm stupid because I don't understand the plot. And they stirred up some serious internal struggle in the United States for some other reason, which gets you right away into the World Economic Forum and all that stuff. And it's all real and it's all garbled. And anyone who thinks they understand the World Economic Forum is delusional because they're blatantly bizarre.
Yeah.
If it's blatant, it's not
wanting
true.
Us to eat crickets. It's just, it's mind-blowing what's going on there. It's tough to follow anymore as well because there's so many sidearms to the main story now.
But it's getting more absurd even. They went from you won't own anything and you'll be happy. One of the most recent catchphrases was, there's no reason why life has to be fulfilling. I'm going, boom, boom. You just said something that made all their other statements look benign.
Yeah.
Life has to be fulfilling. Period. For everybody.
What's the whole point then otherwise?
What's the purpose? Just shoot yourself then. Just shoot yourself. So crazy. This is frustrating me. Yeah. And I see a rising authoritarianism. So my apocalypse is complete loss of any sense of democracy. That's my apocalypse.
I think that's where it's headed. It's starting to feel like we're heading there. Like there's so many examples for that, and we could talk about this for hours. Like the trucker protests in Canada was another example for that.
And the hammering the farmers in the Netherlands, and oh my God, there can't be a first order reason for doing that. There's got to be something much deeper. You don't pick on farmers, you don't pick on truckers. It's that simple. But they did.
Exactly. So, and on that note, I think we need to end this here, Dave. Just want to keep this up. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, getting your insights, chatting mining stocks as well. Didn't expect to get that far with you, and also what is happening in the world? Like, what is happening, right? Trying to make sense of it all. So, really appreciate your time, Dave. Thanks for coming on. And to everybody else, really appreciate you tuning in. Thanks for watching SF Live. We were joined by Dave Collum. Please follow him on Twitter and to email him, like you suggested. Like, email him, like, why are the miners so cheap? If you have an opinion, like, it's way beyond my imagination and, like, critical thinking levels, like, why that is the case. Because, especially in this day and age, it's just mind-blowing. So if you have an explanation, email him and I'll get him back on the program to discuss your feedback. Really appreciate it. Make sure to follow us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, and we'll be back with more content very soon. Thank you so much.